Good afternoon. I'm Shannon Gibson. I'm the Dean of the O'Malley College of Business, and I'd love to welcome you to joining us today as we continue our Business of Flight Week. Today, we are exceptionally honored to have three fabulous speakers with us who are here to talk about their experiences during the past year in the aviation and aerospace industry. The past year has been a tough year for many industries, and certainly aviation has not been immune. We have all heard the statistics on changes in travel, flight time, manufacturing. It's been a tough year for many. However, as with all previous crises, opportunity also presents itself, and we're seeing growth and positive outcomes in areas of both business and commercial aviation. Today, our three exceptional panelists represent three different sectors from the business of flight. We have Beatrice Ashe, Sales Director from Jet Aviation, Damon DeAgostino, President and CEO at Zephyrus Aviation Capital, and Michael Moore, Executive Vice President at Essex Aviation. And more importantly than all of that, all three of them are alumni of the O'Malley College of Business. So I'm very excited to have them here sharing this time with us. I think the best thing we can do to orient the audience is to have each one of you tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe with your story, tell us about your career trajectory to date. Damon, will you start for us?
Sure thing, Dr. Gibson, and good afternoon, everybody. Honored to be here this afternoon. So my name is Damon DeAgostino. I'm a 1994 graduate at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Degree was aviation business administration, and following Embry-Riddle, I went on and received an MBA at the University of Miami in finance and international business. My career has really been exclusively in commercial aviation, and in particular in finance, and even drilled down even further from finance into commercial aircraft leasing. So shortly after graduating from Embry-Riddle, I joined an organization called the CIT Group, which is a commercial bank headquartered in the New York, New Jersey area. I started there as an analyst in the commercial aircraft leasing division and stayed there really for almost 25 years. And in 2017, we sold that business to another leasing company, and I exited at the time. I was the chief commercial officer. Exited the business, and along with a few of my fellow colleagues from CIT, we founded Zephyrus Aviation Capital in 2018. Zephyrus Aviation Capital is a small aircraft leasing company that specializes in midlife aircraft. And it's been an interesting dynamic going from a larger bank to a small startup. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those dynamics, and especially relative to the current state of the industry a little bit later. But thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you here, Damon. Damon is also the chair of my Business Leadership Council, so I get to work with him quite a bit. Beatrice, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. Beatrice Ashe. When I went to Riddle, my last name was Enkel. So I came to the US. I'm born and raised in Sweden, but came to the US to learn English. But also to run on the track team and pursue a degree in business aviation and administration. So I'm a graduate in 2012, so fairly recently. And I was introduced to corporate aviation via Embry-Riddle, where I met with JSSI, Jet Support Services, that are based in Chicago. And I got my internship up there at my last year, my senior year, and then I got a job shortly after, and that's kind of how my career took off. So after that, we moved back to Europe. I got a job with Jet Aviation, and I started working in maintenance sales and FBO sales, taking care of Scandinavia and the UK, but I was based out of our headquarters in Basel, Switzerland. My husband, we met at Embry-Riddle. So after a while, we said, okay, let's go back to the US. So last year, actually, we moved back, and now we're in California, still working for Jet Aviation, and now more on the sector of aircraft management. So I'm based here on the West Coast, taking care of the Northwest and Pacific Northwest, working with the clients that have their own aircraft and doing sort of aircraft management sales for these clients. So.
Thanks, Beatrice. I appreciate that. And Michael Moore.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Moore. I'm the Executive Vice President at Essex Aviation. I am a Riddle graduate. I guess I'm the oldest person on the call here today because I graduated in 1991. So I graduated in 1991. My career path pretty much has been, I got out of school and went to go work for Continental Airlines in Newark, New Jersey. I did that for about a little over a year. And then I got a job working for Millionaire Charter out of Teterboro, New Jersey, which has turned into Meridian Charter ultimately. But I sold, private jet charters there for about 3 years. Went to go work for a company called Flight Services Group and probably maybe 2-3 years in, we were bought by Private Air based out of Geneva, Switzerland. So it was a pretty exciting time for me. I was probably my late 20s, early 30s, and got a lot of going back and forth to Europe for sales meetings and stuff like that. I did that until 2002. I started my own Part 135 air carrier certificate and charter company with an investor that had 2 old Hawkers. Back in the day, they were newer Hawkers. And we did that for a few years, got out of that and went to go work for Meridian Air Charter, which I worked for probably about 11 and a half years prior to coming to Essex. At Essex, my job function was basically, I was hired to do aircraft management and kind of grow the company, build the Meridian brand, so to speak. And over the years, my role there kind of progressed into not only being in charge of all the aircraft management for the company, but in charge of fuel sales and retail charter sales. And during that time, we opened up an FBO out in California in the Bay Area. So very interesting time to, kind of pull together your whole skill set and your network and kind of build a brand that is very strong on the East Coast and bring it out to the West Coast. About a year and a half ago, I accepted a position with Essex Aviation. And in my current role, I do aircraft acquisitions and consulting. And it's been a good opportunity for me to kind of utilize all the skills I've acquired over the years from, management to, whole aircraft ownership, jet cards, charter, the whole 9 yards. And just want to thank everybody for participating today. And I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
I'm excited to have all of you here. So I think we're going to start with one of the easy questions. And each of you is at a very different type of organization, different in size, different in scope, different in mission. But what I'd like you to speak to is how has the pandemic made you a better leader? And what have you done? What have you learned? And what has changed for you as a result of the past year? Beatrice, we'll start with you.
Sorry about that. Yes, I think we've all learned quite a lot during this pandemic. And I think just personally, I came over here a year ago and I was still on maternity leave. And then I had my start day with Jet Aviation on aircraft management sales on April 1st, which was also like the official day of lockdown in, I think, all of the US. So it was just sort of weird to, you started your orientation, everything, this like getting to know your colleagues, and everyone was in kind of a shock situation too. But I think the most important part that I've learned is just that you just had to reset all the expectations that you've had throughout this whole year, all the plans that you had, and that could have been weddings, travel plans, but professionally too, like what you wanted to do in your career, how you wanted to see your clients or work with your clients. Everything had to just like constantly change. And it was not just one time. You thought we were on a lockdown for 2 weeks, and then it was a month, and then it was 2 months. And then all of a sudden you start to realize this is probably going to go on for a while. And, they start locking the borders. So I think just like mentally to go into this stage where I think many of us are very used to know and expect what's supposed to happen, but it just kind of folded for all of us. So I think that was extremely important, just to learn that you just have to keep on moving and, you know, be strong and support your colleagues and your employees to just see in different ways. And, you know, you're going through something that some people are, you know, going through something very terrible too. So you just have to continue to support and be there and making sure that everyone is kind of with you. So I think that was very important. And then you had everyone took a pause, which I think was good. I think professionally we learned kind of like we don't have to keep on going in the same pace. My job, I've been working from home for 6 years now, I think so, but I've been traveling quite a lot, but my office has always been home. And then I've been visiting our headquarters. So that was not an adjustment for me, but obviously the technology and everything helped tremendously. And all of a sudden we went from phone calls and emails to video calls. And I think that took us also some learning, right? To learn how to communicate over video, to make everyone comfortable being on video. And this is the way we're gonna learn how to connect. So yeah.
Good insights, Beatrice. Damon, what have you learned in the past year?
A lot. I would say, you know, one thing that I've certainly has been a mantra for anybody who's involved in aviation, put aside a pandemic, right, is that change is constant. We're in an industry that's always evolving, always changing. It's very cyclical. This, of course, is unlike anything that anybody's ever experienced before. But you know, what I've kind of drawn from it is that you can pull a lot of lessons from, you know, your past playbook and apply them maybe in a few different ways and a few different fashions to the current situation that we're in. You know, a colleague of mine and I were speaking the other day, and she mentioned, I thought it was a great, you know, I'd never heard it before, but the saying, "Smooth seas don't create great sailors." Well, that's certainly, you know, that's certainly the case. Unfortunately, it's not an aviation, you know, adage, but I think, you know, everybody can relate. And so for people who are going through the situation that we're in right now, everybody is going to be much better for it on the other side. They'll have learned a lot. They'll have applied a lot of lessons. Some of the things as a leader, you know, that I've kind of taken away. One is, you know, building on what Beatrice said a minute ago, but being an empathetic leader to your team. You know, just understanding that everybody copes with or deals or manages with the situation in different ways, you know, shapes and fashions, and that's okay. People are wired differently, and I think we all have to remember that. And the stress that this puts on, you know, people presents itself differently. Similarly with customers and clients, you know, so the default setting for a lot of our airline customers is the pandemic is crushing us. And it's, you know, it is the case, but I think it's also important that people, you know, kind of across the industry realize that no one is unique in that aspect, and that we're all sharing the pain. We're all being impacted. Some people are obviously being impacted to a greater degree than others, but it is a common denominator right now. So I think that's important as well. But specifically on the leadership side, I would say certainly, you know, to be empathetic, to give grace, and just to really support the team as best you can.
I like that a lot. Mike, what's changed for you as a leader during the past year?
I would say, you know, it's funny that I was sitting here thinking, and you know, like this isn't my first rodeo. When I first started at Meridian, literally my first day in the job was the day Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy back in 2008. And I can remember sitting at my desk going, "That's great. The whole world's just crumbling." And I'm like the new guy at the job, day one. Like, there's no way I'm going to weather this storm. But I did. I reinvented myself back then. And when COVID hit right here, I kind of thought the same thing. I'm like, here we go again. You know, 2 months into the new job, we have a global pandemic. You know, how do you get out of this? For me, I'd say it forced me to become more of a focused person in the business world. And when I say that, I mean I'm in sales. So I think back of the majority of my career is out on the road, talking to people, shaking hands, having meetings, buying lunches, buying dinners, that's just what I did. So, and when you're good at that and that's what you do for a living and you can't do that anymore, you say to yourself, like, what do I do now? So like Beatrice said, was forced to live in a world where, okay, now I have to be comfortable getting on a screen, having Zoom meetings and team meetings versus individual meetings. And it really, you definitely have to reinvent yourself a little bit. One thing I can't stress enough, especially for, the students on this call right here, is what I've learned is the importance of my network that I've built over the course of my career. I think of how many times every time I'm on a Zoom call with 20 people, I think to myself, how much easier this would be if I was at an event, a cocktail party, and I was just walking around and, like, hey, Beatrice, how you doing? Talking to people and stuff like that. Networking in a virtual world is extremely difficult. But I think that, if you are an effective networker and you work on that throughout the years, when things like this happen, and hopefully this will never happen again, but when things like this happen, you have those strong relationships that you can draw on, because let's face it, you can't go anywhere in the last year. You're really tied to, I can call people, but are they going to take my call? You get to that. So it's definitely helped me become a more focused individual, helping others where I can, not only professionally, but personally in my life, of just being, fortunate to, to be gainfully employed and have a roof over my head during this whole process. My grandfather used to always say, hey, you got a roof over your head, you got food on the table, you have a job, you can, you're doing good. And, my whole life and as a kid, I would think that's just what Depression era kids said, and then the pandemic hit and it really made you think about that statement, because I know a lot of very talented people in the professional world that are having a very difficult time right now, and it has nothing to do with their aptitude or how well they did in their career. It's just circumstances. Who could have foreseen that this was going to happen? So, like Damon said, it makes you a more empathetic person, not only personally, but in the business world too.
So Mike, you have laid a framework for the next question, and several of you have alluded to it. And this is not the first crisis which has had an impact on the aviation industry, and it certainly won't be the last.
Yes.
Can you speak to how COVID's been the same and different from some of these other crises? And please feel free to discuss people, operations, strategy.
Yeah, I would say the biggest, I'll go back to the financial crisis in 2008. For me, when that happened, two totally different, the crises are totally different. And the way they were viewed by the world were totally different, right? In 2008, aviation was really kind of, I can still remember sitting there watching TV when the big three car makers went to Washington, D.C. and, they asked them how they got here today and why did they fly in their jets. And in my mind, I was like, I wish I was sitting in that chair, because I could have answered that question so much better than they did, right? And just said like, hey, listen, this is part of a long-term strategy. We already owned the asset before the crisis. We flew out here cheaper at our direct operating cost than we could have ever done commercially, and we're not paying for hotels. And what happened was that really turned it into it made aviation was kind of like a four-letter word, right? Even I had so many of my current clients at the time would call me up and say, listen, I know you go through my assistant, my people. For me to book my own charter from now on, if I need my jet, I will call you direct. Do not talk to anybody in my office, because it was a very difficult thing for them. These are people that are industry leaders, and although they're impacted to a certain extent in their business life, monetarily, they're not impacted where they have to, sell their assets and sell their planes. They can still afford to fly private, but the optics of that were very bad during 2008 and 9, where you're, telling your sales force that you have to, take pay cuts and lay people off, but, you still have your private jet and your yacht crew. So, it was looked at very different. And I think that Damon can probably kick in on some of this later. What we saw at that time was aircraft values plummet during 2009. People were trying to get out of their airplanes. I think we had a lot, times were different back then. There were a lot of people that were kind of like, listen, if I had somebody that owned an aircraft and bought it for 25 million, which we had people, and they would come back now and say, hey, the airplane's only worth 15 million now, but if I sell it, I've owned it for 5 years. If I sell it, I still have to, I owe the bank money, and then I got to pay some recaptured depreciation. So I'm better off just, bleeding out slowly over the next handful of years, as opposed to just selling this plane today and writing a check for, $8-9 million. So, I mean, it was very difficult, and nobody was really chartering because financially things were tough. You move into this next COVID phase. And I think in the very beginning, we had a lot of clients that kind of looked at this as this could be an opportunity to find value in the market when it comes to aircraft, aircraft values. And the aircraft values really didn't, in my opinion, didn't go down any more than they normally do in any other typical year. And what we saw in end of Q3 into Q4 last year was more people buying airplanes, more first-time buyers coming into the market, and people coming in. And, we had clients that would say, Mike, I've been in FlexJet or NetJets for 10 years, but I'm retired, and, I probably made more money than I could spend in my lifetime, but I'm not in a big hurry to go anywhere. And it just seems crazy to spend $18,000 to fly from New York to Palm Beach when I can do it on JetBlue for 400. So let's figure out a way to get me out of all my shares. And, and literally a month later, that same guy called back and said, I'm not getting out of my shares. We're never flying commercial again. So, I mean, it was a different mentality. And I think there's a whole demographic of individuals out there that have the means to travel privately, but would never consider spending that kind of money on traveling privately, versus that changed when COVID hit. So we have a lot of new people getting into the market, buying airplanes. We do on the consulting side, I have a lot of people buying into, fractionals, ownership, lease, a lot of people buying travel cards, jet cards. So we've seen a big increase in that. And it went from, 2009 aviation, being like the black eye of the world, to 2020, people are gravitating towards private aviation. In my opinion, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in aviation, because there's only a finite amount of aircraft available in the market, right? If there's, off the top of my head, maybe 4,500 jets that are, Part 135 or fractional in the US, more people are getting into the markets. The card companies are selling thousands of cards. There's a lot of new entrants. So where's all the new lift going to come from? And that there's going to be some challenges there, I think, in the market moving forward, as far as, guaranteed availability and just being able to have access. There was always a lot of lift out there. There was more supply than demand. And I think you're going to see that reverse a lot in the next year.
I like the observations. Beatrice or Damon, do you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there on what you said, Mike, with the difference. But I think something that was very interesting in our industry in particular, and I'm sure it was all over, obviously, but the technology that we have today compared to back then, it's hugely different. So the way of communication and the ease of communication was so much better. And I think, we had a big organization that has events for our industry, and they've been doing that for many years, Corporate Jet Investors. They said, okay, everyone, we have a town hall on Wednesday, join us. And we get together and we listen to each other. What's going on? How can we together go through this? And what should we do to make sure this is not, because in the beginning, no one knew if it was going to be the same impact as the financial crisis. So I think everyone was very alert and worried that it was going to be the same catastrophe. So we got together, and weekly they hosted these webinars, and we had 500 people at a minimum joining from all over the world every Wednesday. I think it was Thursday somewhere. And it was really interesting. And the speakers that got on, they took different leaders from different sectors every week. And we just talked about it. And I think this way of us communicating and kind of making a plan together is like, we are not going to drop the prices on the aircraft this time. We're gonna stand strong and like whatever you do, and I think it was even someone who said that, like, whatever you do, don't drop the prices of the aircraft, like make sure we keep the value strong. And then obviously it ended up being a crisis that kind of benefited our industry, seeing that people wanted to fly charter instead. And as Mike said, that now the jet cards, I think we're selling too many jet cards because we don't have enough aircraft. Everyone wants a charter, and the people who did, I see it as the people who flew in first class, they went up to charter. The people who charters, they bought their own aircraft. And then you also have the people who have their own aircraft, but they're now wanting more people in their corporation to fly privately as well for the safety aspect. So obviously this pandemic kind of spoke to our industry since we had the safety. So this made it easier on our end, but I really think the communication and the webinars and the sharing of information this time around helped us tremendously.
Great observation. Damon, add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it a little bit more from a commercial perspective, which is obviously very different than the corporate aviation. But I think the genesis of the question really is, how has this crisis been the same or different? And so perhaps starting there, if I think through, just in my career, the number of crises, whether it was Gulf War, SARS, avian flu, volcanic eruptions, unfortunately 9/11, global financial crisis, et cetera, each of those has some, bearing and resemblance to what we're going through now. But I would say that you basically put all of those together, and the impact of all of that probably doesn't equate to what we're seeing now in terms of the impact on commercial aviation. And the reason why is a couplefold. One is most of those events I just described were specific to a certain geographical location, and they were also much shorter in duration. And so 9/11 was a horrific event here in the United States, but it really didn't impact traffic and demand after a few days later in the rest of the world. Whereas it's obviously, COVID is impacting everywhere. And so because of that, you have a system that's very much designed to be supply and demand, close to equilibrium, that is way off of equilibrium right now. So today and for the last year, you've had, somewhere between, well, right now it's about 30% of the commercial, world's commercial jet fleet parked. You had, that number was obviously much higher if you rewound to 12 months ago. So you have a lot less demand, and you have, a lot more supply. And so it's been a very deep cut in terms of aircraft values. I think the one thing that we can rely on is, if you go back to each of these crises, the industry obviously did come back, and it's come back stronger. Commercial aviation is very closely correlated to GDP growth. And so because of that, and looking at the future and the outlook for GDP growth, we do know that it will come back, and we do know that it'll come back stronger than where we were at the end of 2019, early 2020. It's just going to take a little bit longer to get there.
Damon, you're the perfect person then to tackle the next question, because you are in commercial aviation, which is different, and the challenges have been different. So how have you or your organization really engaged in opportunity recognition and assessment, and trying to find ways to capitalize on these opportunities that you see in the future?
Yeah, so I think the first thing, in this industry that we're in, the first thing we had to do was really just, triage the situation that was around us. And I would say that the first perhaps 9 months or so of the pandemic was a lot of defense, and a lot of kind of hand-to-hand managing what was going on in the immediacy. As that sort of settled down a little bit, and we as an organization and companies like ours were able to sort of assess what was really likely to be the kind of, I wouldn't say new normal, but the intermediate normal, and then kind of assess what the needs were for the airlines, who are ultimately our customers, and companies like us are customers. That's when we were able to really sort of pivot and say, okay, you have a really broad swath of customers all around the world that the one common denominator is they all need capital. We are in the business essentially of providing capital. We secure that capital against aircraft. So then it really became an exercise of looking to see which airlines really had the need, but also you felt like, would be survivors or, had the best chance of survival. Just because someone needs capital and they have aircraft, you don't want to necessarily invest there. So you have to do a real risk assessment of their environment and their situation. And then it really just becomes kind of putting all those pieces together. And also, looking at opportunities for companies that perhaps maybe are too weak to survive what's going on. And I wouldn't say necessarily helping them, and I wouldn't like to categorize it as taking advantage of it, but that's just sort of the reality. Not everybody's going to survive. And that's going to create some opportunities as well. Or maybe there's certain companies that don't have the skill set that's needed to kind of pivot in working with them and things. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do, but I think the first is you've got to get the house in order, sort of put the immediate fires out so that you can then look to the medium term and then the longer term.
That makes great sense. Mike, how about you? Opportunity recognition and capitalization.
Mute. I would say on the opportunity side, I guess like everybody else, when the pandemic hit, we all kind of like put our seatbelts on and, we're all wondering where we're going to go. We actually had the busiest year that we've had in the company history. Although, I've been there for a year and a half, just looking back historically at our numbers and the amount of transactions and the amount of consulting work we did, we got busier. So, I guess we were able to capitalize on it from the perspective that we had a lot of clients that might not necessarily focus so much on their aircraft, their asset, what it's costing them. Are they with the right management company? Are they getting the right payback on their charter? They get these, $200,000 aircraft management bills every month. They just looks the same, good, sign off on it. So we had a handful of people that came through in the very beginning that said, hey, we're going to take this downtime to really take a second look at our asset, how we utilize it, how we foresee ourselves utilizing it in the future. Are we with the right company? Do these bills make sense to you? And I'd say 99% of the time they do. We did a lot of flight department reviews for people where you go in and look at all their management statements for the last year and kind of pick out all the things that they're paying for. And are you contractually obligated to pay for this? Do you have a good deal? A lot of people hired us to help them negotiate new deals. I do think that a lot of the consulting work, in our world, we're not big on, we don't run print advertising or ads. We're very active on social media and our search engine optimization kind of stuff. But we're without a doubt a referral based business. So I feel like we probably connected to more people during the crisis than we did prior to the crisis. It's kind of interesting that prior to that, I was out shaking hands, but now it was kind of like, hey, you did a flight department review for my friend here, or you helped them with a fractional thing here, or you found them a new management company there. Can you help me too? So we saw a big increase in the consulting side of the business. So that really helped us bridge the gap from in the very beginning when people were kind of like, well, let's wait and see what's going on. And then that got us, like I said, into Q3 and 4, where all of a sudden we were doing more first-time transactions for buyers than we ever did in the past. And that wasn't just, I don't want to make it sound like, we're the greatest. I think we are, but that's a common theme throughout the rest of the brokers in the industry too. I think everybody had great years. All my friends and colleagues in the industry that, kind of do what I do for a living. We were all singing the same tune in Q4 last year. Nobody had time to breathe because we were all, focused on finding airplanes and, gaining traction. So that was our spin on it.
Beatrice, opportunities you've seen and hopefully your company's taking advantage of?
Yes, absolutely. And compared to Mike, who saw that immediate effect of clients buying aircraft for jet aviation, we see that effect when they finally start flying those aircraft, right? So when they come and visit our FBOs and when they want to engage in an aircraft management company, and then also the sale of the jet cards. And the jet cards is one of those big opportunities that we saw, and we realized fairly quickly that this was going to be big. So we took an existing product, but we remarketed it and we revisited it and we made it better, and then we put it out again, and that's been a great opportunity for us where we capture a lot of the market. I think for jet aviation, they've always, like, our main focus is safety, and it's the biggest for us, and that's always our top priority. And many times our clients, and this is good, right? They don't see what we do for safety, because hopefully everything goes well and the aircraft are flying just as they will. But during this pandemic, I think our clients saw what we did and how quick we are to respond, and they really appreciated this. So this became an additional opportunity where we could just showcase, like, the backbone that we have, and we have this we always have a virtual database emergency center, and when COVID hit, we had this map where you could kind of see where you could fly, where you shouldn't fly, what the regulations were to come into that airport. And it was so good that we just allowed anyone in the industry to access our virtual database. And we just sent out the link and said, like, just go on here, you have all the information. We're a General Dynamics company. It's that the information is valid, you have it up to date. And I think from that, many of our current customers, but also new ones, they just saw the trust that they could have in jet aviation when something like this happens. So we tried to capture on that. And additionally, on that safety comes the hygiene protocols that we had to put in place, like everyone else, right? We had to do COVID rules, and for our passengers, for our crew. So all this was something that we implemented and put in place as soon as possible, just to make sure that people were safe when they flew with us. And then on the maintenance side, we started to install a bipolar ionizer in the air conditioned unit, so we could clean the air. So people who charter their aircraft, but they also flew it on themselves, they wanted to make sure that their aircraft was clean. So this became an opportunity, right, where we could install additional services to your aircraft to make sure it's clean. And that's been highly popular, and especially in Europe, where many of our clients came into Basel to have this installed. And then I think it's been we've seen a lot of new buyers coming into the market. So try to recognize them and educate them. Business aviation is, buying an aircraft is not like buying a car. So, and many think that, if I buy an aircraft and I have it chartered, it's not going to cost me any money to fly it myself. So it's been a lot of just, and I think Mike has had many of these discussions too, where you have to kind of bring them down. You have to kind of set the expectations, and they might have been told something that's not really true. And we've been trying to utilize any webinars, any chances that we have to speak. We've tried to be there as Jet Aviation and just try to lead and educate. And I think that's really important that we all in this industry are trying to do that together and to set the expectations right from start.
I love that. There's been lots of opportunity on both the service and the product side. So it's glad to hear people doing that. Our next question actually aligns very well with some of the audience questions and answers that are going in. So if you haven't seen them, the Q&A folder is open, and we always make sure we get back to these at the end if possible. But having talked about the opportunities we've been taking advantage of, the follow-up question is, and so what challenges are you encountering, and where do you see the industry moving forward in the coming 1 year, but really what challenges. And I think that aligns nicely, maybe probably with a question from Amir talking about what are we doing with prematurely retired aircraft, enforced lease returns, mergers, and how that's changing things within the field, and maybe even the growth in aviation fleets. So who would like to tackle these questions in terms of challenges and what you're seeing? Damon?
Yeah, I'll kick off. I think so. I talked a little bit about the need for capital. That's one thing, but there's also a lot of airlines that are doing the same assessment of, just the current situation. And by that, some of those airlines are pulling back. And these are airlines that I would say will be survivors, but they're going to pull back. They're going to be smaller. And then there's going to be other airlines that are going to see an opportunity from that. So for instance, here in the US, we've got 2 airlines that are, really in the final stages of certification and launching. One that's being founded and funded by David Neilman, who has been very successful with a number of airlines. And, the last one here in the US was JetBlue and Azul down in Brazil, and others as well. So he sees an opportunity. And then there's another airline on the west coast of the US called Avelo, which is been launched by the former founder and president of Allegiant Airlines and former CFO at United. And those are just 2 domestic US examples. There's going to be many others like that. There's probably 70 to 75 business plans at various stages right now around the world for airlines that are going to say, okay, there's pullback from other airlines, or some cases airlines that have gone out of business and they've left routes that are underserved or unserved. There's an opportunity in the sense that aircraft for right now are much cheaper. There's a labor force that is available. So everything's really lining up for some airlines to be able to launch and to start an operation. And so, for us, the challenge out of that is going to be, okay, how do you then pick a winner, or, who are going to be some of the winners, and trying to apply the right lens and the right filter to those business plans, to the, really expectations that the management teams have, et cetera. And I think that's one that, again, you have to go back in history, and there's really not a lot of substitute for experience in this regard, and having seen how airlines have come out of other crises, how they've been born, and where those winners are going to be, and there will be many of them. So I would say it's that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is just kind of sifting through the opportunities and then trying to determine really who are going to be the ones that you'd bet on, if you will.
Beatrice or Michael, challenges you're seeing in your sector of the industry at this time, and what do you think will be the big moves in the next short term?
I'll jump in. I would say the biggest thing that we're seeing and I'll look at it from 2 different angles. The first one is on the charter side, people that are buying cards and charter, and the impact that's having on the industry. I think there's a lot of new flyers that are coming into the industry. That's putting a lot of stress on the aviation industry itself. I mean, I've heard from several colleagues that have gone through they've been in long enough that they've been through the .com bubble burst, in the late 90s. They've been through 9/11, they've been through the financial crisis, and now in COVID. And a lot of them are saying, like, this is the worst I've seen, like, availability and lift in my 30 years in aviation. So I think that's going to become increasingly more of a challenge in the industry, because you have more flyers, and the amount of aircraft hitting the market, it just can't keep up. It can't keep up the pace. So it's going to be interesting to see how that angle plays out. I think there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to have a hard time delivering on some of the promises that they're making. On the aircraft transaction side, I think what we're seeing, and we were already seeing it in Q4, is that people getting into certain aircraft model types, the markets are very tight. I'm talking, 300, aircraft in the fleet, and 8 for sale, 3 of them really for sale. We spent a lot of the fourth quarter, vetting the market and coming down to like, here's my top 3 candidates, and I call all 3, and all 3 are under contract. I mean, it's really no different than trying to buy a house in a very hot housing market, right? So I think there's going to be some challenges there. One of the questions, I'm not reading it off my screen, but I read it before, was, how are we going to deal with this with older aircraft? I think one of the things we're starting to see now too is that there are a lot of aircraft types out there. Like off the top of my head, if you were talking about like a G4SP, that's still a very great aircraft, and people look at it now and say, oh well, it's a 20-year-old airplane, and that thing's really old. I mean, it really is a good aircraft, and I think now you're starting to see people go in and say, instead of spending $16 million on a plane, I can buy an aircraft for $5 million. I can upgrade the avionics. I can completely, re-rag the interior. I can paint the exterior. I can put some money into it and still have a great airplane to fly around in domestically. In some of these cases, even internationally, if you're going to like, Western Europe, especially from the New York area, a lot of people that were looking at, G4SPs and stuff to go back and forth to, hit that whole London, Western Europe market. In addition to that, I think you're seeing a lot of people with buyers take a different view of what it costs me to own and operate this plane, and looking at it and saying, geez, I'm going to buy this asset for, $2 million or $4 million. Should I keep it on an engine program, or is this going to really be a disposable asset for me at the end of 5 years? I'm sure, Damon, I'm sure you've seen some of this come down the way in the business you're in, and really counseling people on, I don't know, do you put, hundreds of thousands of dollars or $1 million into an engine program? At the end, the aircraft itself might be a disposable asset. The engines will still have some value, so you can go sell them on the market. But the question is, do you want to put the money in and then try to get it out on the back end? So I think you're seeing a lot of people look at the aircraft market that way. And I think you're going to have to, like I said, there's more people looking to buy aircraft. So it's not going to be that I'm not buying an airplane that's over 10 years old. We're seeing very, the ultra high net worth, very top of the food chain individuals that are coming in and saying, why spend 40 million if I can go spend 18, and then I'll go spend another $2 million doing the interior how I want it, and upgrading, the Wi-Fi on there, and putting paint in there. And I really have a good asset that I can fly around on. My next major inspection is not for another 6-7 years. So I do think that's going to change. That's going to change the market. I mean, it has to change the market. You can't just retire these airplanes and put them out the pasture. There's just not enough of them out there to meet the demand.
Good observation. Beatrice, challenges you're seeing now popping up on your sector, and what do you think is going to happen in the next year?
Yeah, I think Mike and Damon touched on most of the things, but as I mentioned earlier, the educating the market is certainly a big challenge, and that's something we need to continue to do to make sure that we advocate our business and our industry in the best way forward. We also, obviously the border restriction is a huge challenge for us, but even more so for our clients, people who are used to fly back and forth, Europe, US, Asia, Europe, Asia. When are we going to see these restrictions ease? And how is this, like, are we going to get the vaccine out everywhere, and are we going to be able to travel like we used to? So we don't really know how long this is going to take. And I think that's a challenge in itself, to be able to plan, and people have their own aircraft. Are they going to keep the large aircraft, or are they going to downsize? Are they going to fly only domestic or long range? So I think, everyone's, the plan they did in the past, it doesn't work anymore. And we've already seen some corporations that have their own flight department in-house. The first thing they did was, okay, we're not going to fly the aircraft, so we can let go of some of these people, because we don't need 30 people in our flight department if we're not touching the aircraft. But everyone who works in aviation knows that you still need to take care of your asset in the same way. And it's pretty much the same work that goes in if you fly it or not fly it. And you're going to have to take the aircraft out for a little spin to make sure you keep the cycles and everything. So I think this has also kind of became an opportunity for us at Jet Aviation, where we looked at, okay, we offer a full aircraft management solution, but what if we take some of our services out and offer it as an a la carte? So to these flight departments that are now screaming for support, they can't handle it all themselves in-house anymore. They can kind of just buy into certain services. So I don't know if we're going to see more of that, and that people might, you know, have a smaller, thinner flight department and utilize external services in the next coming years. Yeah, we don't really know what's going to happen, right? So it's we'll see, but yeah.
I think everyone would agree that that is one difference with this pandemic, is it's been very difficult to foretell where we'll be in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, because every time we think we have a handle on something, it changes. And that may make it somewhat different than in the past as well, where it's been a little more consistent in the cycles. So my last question before we shift to talking more directly to students, because I know there are a lot of students listening, and I like to get to advice and your thoughts for them. But before we go there, I would say, how has the past year changed where you see the future of your sector of the industry? You know, what are you most optimistic about going forward? But also, what changed for you in terms of what your expectations were and what you think will happen and what you see for the future? Who wants to take a stab?
I think I can, yeah, I can start quickly. I think something that we all realized when everyone is talking about sustainability today, and that wasn't a year ago, we didn't hear that much, especially not, it was a little bit in commercial aviation. We didn't really have it demanded by our clients in business aviation. But during this pandemic, more and more people, and now I work in the Bay Area, so I think I see it probably firsthand, but we see it in Europe, we see it now in the US, and everyone is talking about sustainability, sustainable aviation fuel. It's recycling programs, it's carbon offsets, lighter aircraft, better aircraft, electric aircraft. So I think if anything, that there is going to be a focus, and I think our industry has learned that we need to be on the forefront of sustainability. And I think Jet Aviation was the first to have sustainability aviation fuel in the US, and we had it in 2019 in Venice, which was a big marketing event, but it wasn't as big as it is now, right? So I think more people will follow. And I know in Northern California, we now have a chair on the association up there that's focused only on sustainability, to try to kind of gather how do we get more sustainable aviation fuel to the FBOs, and what's the footprint of getting the sustainable aviation fuel to these FBOs. We need to do it the right way. And what is this gonna, how is this gonna impact? More and more flight department needs to have their own sustainable department in-house. So I think that's really big. And then another sector of that is how people internally have looked at their employees. So I think diversity, inclusion, equity, it's big now, right? Everyone needs to focus on how are we treating our employees and how are we being diverse. And I think for business aviation, that is tradition. And I went to Embry-Riddle too, so it's highly male dominated, and this is something now that we are all focused on. How do we get more inclusion into our industry, and how do we work to make sure that everyone feel welcome to work in our industry? So I hope to see that as a positive effect from all of this that will come in the next coming years.
It's a nice way to look to the future. Damon, what are your thoughts?
You know, it's funny. So if I were to say, you know, kind of like rewind the clock a year ago, where did I think we'd be today? Just as a commercial aviation industry, I'm amazed. You know, my office, I'm fortunate, is here in Fort Lauderdale Airport, and I look out over a runway and I see airplanes. And a year ago, you know, very, very few, and now, you know, quite a lot. And So I'm glad to see the resilience, overall of the industry, and I think that's that's great. And I think this kind of crisis that everybody's going through will build on that. But more than anything, I think it tells us, people love to travel, they need to travel, they want to travel, and I expect that commercial aviation will rebound stronger than it was, for a number of reasons. But one very fundamental psychological reason is when you don't have something, you miss it even more. And I think I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who maybe didn't even travel that much, but because they can't travel, now they want to travel. And so I think that's kind of of an interesting dynamic. But I expect a fairly rapid recovery, at least in the leisure market, certainly in domestic markets, and I think that will continue. And then I love what Beatrice said, just the kind of people taking the pause, and kind of innovating. And I think we're seeing a lot of innovation. This webinar is a great example of innovation. You had Zoom webinars before, but not really, that much. Now they're very prevalent. But morally in our space, like innovation in terms of sustainability, in terms of you almost can't go a day right now without reading about an electric, airplane that a couple years ago we would have said, oh, commercial aircraft electric, no way. Or, cockpits that, and this might not play so well to the Embry-Riddle students who are studying for their pilot's license, but, where you've got less pilots in the cockpit, or, a pilot on the ground and a pilot in the air, all these technologies that overall are going to be very positive for the industry. Maybe, maybe not for certain sectors within the industry or individuals, but overall very positive. So I think that's kind of, something that I look forward to as well.
I love that optimism. That's good. Mike, how has what you see for the future changed?
I see a tremendous amount. I'm an optimist myself, and I see good things. I mean, I'm writing notes as people are talking here. I mean, one of the biggest things I see coming out of this pandemic is I think business aviation is really viewed as a positive now, whereas before it was viewed as like, kind of a perk for the rich or the ultra high net worth individual. And I think that perception has definitely changed, or, and people now feel like they have that justification to whatever their companies, their boards, everything else. I agree with Damon. The resilience out there never ceases to amaze me as somebody that's been at this for, I've lived through several different financial crises in my career. But the one that jumps out to the most to me when you say commercial aviation is going to bounce back, I agree, because I was, working in New Jersey, and I was sitting on the turnpike watching planes fly into the World Trade Center back on 9/11. And I thought to myself, the hate to look at it this way, but great for business aviation, because after 9/11, we were very busy. But, people are resilient. They bounce back. And it didn't take very long after 9/11 before people were very willingly getting back on airplanes. I can still remember getting on my first commercial flight 3 months after 9/11 and looking at every person they get up to go to the bathroom. But you get over it and move on. And I think that there's a lot of people that are going to buy into the business aspect of the market and buy planes and charter. But I do think that people will just, get back on airplanes. I think you'll see more people wearing masks, even if vaccinations take off and they eradicate COVID, but you'll still see that. But I do think that, as a whole, I think the industry is going to be looked upon positively. It's going to be interesting to see how things move forward. I think COVID really taught companies how to work remote, work from home. So that I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic for companies that are trying to, make ends meet, the aircraft management companies, the charter companies that need to bring in a certain amount of revenue to pay their bills and pay their overhead. And it's going to be interesting moving forward to see how many of them go back to the big ops center with, 30, 40 people working in a room versus, maybe your core of people doing international flight ops, but like all your salespeople are kind of working remotely from home. Anybody in the charter industry has been kind of working, you have to show up at the office, but you go home at 5 o'clock and you're on your phone and you're on your laptop 24/7, 7 days a week. That's the charter world. So it's going to be very interesting to see what impact that has on the industry. Whereas before we were always very, you got to have a facility right at, if you had real estate at Teterboro Airport, that was great for you, but now all of a sudden, you don't have to be a financial firm and be on Wall Street. You can be anywhere. And I think you're going to see that happening in aviation as we move forward. And it's going to be interesting to see.
So let's talk about things we want students to know going forward. I'm going to be very honest. I chose the 3 panelists you see here very purposefully. A lot of my students come to Embry-Riddle. They're interested in the business of flight, but they have very much what I jokingly call tunnel vision, in the sense that they only foresee themselves going to work for one of the large manufacturers or one of the large airlines. And part of my education in the past year has been to recognize the breadth of this industry and the opportunities that exist. So if you would each of you speak to what you see as the opportunities for students graduating with good knowledge of the business of flight and the opportunities that they might want to consider that they hadn't thought of before?
I guess I could go first. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, and I'm speaking for myself personally. I was just back at Embry-Riddle, about a month ago, and it's great to see how much the program's changed since I was there 100 years ago. But I think that they're more getting into the business side of aviation. I think what a lot of them, I think, didn't realize. I definitely didn't getting out. When I went to Riddle, I was kind of like, I wanted to fly F-18s in the Marine Corps, and that was my vision in my life. And when the Soviet Union fell apart, my junior year in college, I was like, oh great, what am I supposed to do now? I honestly didn't even know that aircraft management was a job. It's not that I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know it existed. And I think there's a lot of jobs and opportunity in definitely in the business aviation market that will give students the ability to do all the things they like to do. I love aviation. I love flying airplanes. I love being on airplanes. Doing what I did in the aircraft management world and consulting is I'm still in aviation, right? I work on aircraft budgets. I talk to pilots. I get to fly on private jets. I get to do all the traveling. I'm very much in aviation, and that scratches that itch for me. But I'm also, married with 2 kids. So I'm not, out on the road 18 days at a time, missing the holidays, missing the Little League game. So I think there's a lot more to private aviation, and there's a lot of different jobs you can apply your skill set to, and don't get so focused on I should do this or I should do that. I mean, for me, it was kind of by accident. I realized I was much better at working with numbers than I was at flying airplanes. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there, and the best thing for people to do is just explore. I always say network. Talk to as many people as you possibly can and find out their life story. Like, how did Damon end up in that chair, and how did Beatrice end up in that chair? What was their career path, and kind of, walk away with something,
Yeah, I think kind of the same way. When I went to Riddle, it was very commercial aviation, and we spoke about Delta, American, United Airlines, Continental back then. But it was, and it just never really spoke to me. So I was like, okay, maybe aviation is not for me. And before I went into Embry-Riddle, I worked for a bank. So I was in finance, and I was like kind of determined that I was going to be, working some way in a bank after college too. But then I was introduced to JSSI, and that was a financial company, and it happened to be in business aviation. And then like that whole world kind of slowly started to open up for me. And I was just like, okay, I didn't really know about the sector. And there's so much, as Mike said, like there are so many smaller jobs within this industry too, where you can apply your skill set. So you have maintenance, right? You have finance, because Mike is sitting on consulting and advising clients of where to go and why to go there. We are more sitting on as the company providing the management operations for the people with their own private jets. It's a small industry where everyone kind of tends to know each other. the events are pretty much including everyone in our sector, but it also has a lot of potential. So I think it's really fun. And if you come in, you're coming from college now, you have that view of, sustainability and just wanting to meet people, wanting to network. It's a very fun and dynamic industry. Where you can get things done, and there are so many opportunities out there too, which hasn't been discovered yet, but you will, because you're going to come in with a fresh mind, and you're like, why are you guys not doing this? And we're going to be like, well, I don't know, I haven't thought about it. So I think really there is, just to, as Mike said too, to come out and network with people in our industry and get to know how it is and what we do. You're going to find the niche where you want to go.
I would add a couple things. One is at this stage of life, and again, we're talking to students who are, in kind of getting closer to graduating, but don't be afraid to try something. If you don't like it, move on. So, that's one thing that I would say. But I would also say, when you're thinking, if you're earlier in your college career and you're thinking, where do you want to go? Where do you want to end up? Try to be a little bit forward thinking into where, the technology of aviation is going. What's topical, not just today, because we're in the midst of a pandemic, but what's going to stick, some of the things that we've talked about as a group here today, and I'm sure some of the other panels have addressed as well. So, where is the industry going? And then try to project yourself, there. So building a path to get you there with your experience. But I couldn't emphasize enough what both Mike and Beatrice said, the network, and in particular, the Embry-Riddle network. This is a network that in aviation is, second to none, and, really has weight. Don't discount that. Every time I run into somebody who I didn't know went to Embry-Riddle, and we have that conversation, an immediate smile, is kind of exchanged between people, because people have a good affinity for Embry-Riddle. They have a good affinity for their background, the professors, their colleagues that they studied with. So make sure you use that. That is part of the value of a degree at any university, and for aviation in particular, this is the best place to be. So don't ever underestimate your network, and use that to its fullest.
Damon, I couldn't agree more. I can't tell you how many times over the years, when people find out you went to Embry-Riddle, it's a conversation starter. I'm one of the very first aircraft management deals I ever landed. I was sitting in the boardroom, and the guy had his chief pilot sitting there, and he looked over on my finger, and I was wearing my Riddle class ring at the time, and he's like, "Do you go to Riddle?" And it turned into this great conversation, which turned into a great deal for me. But it really is good. And to all the students out there, and I preach this when I do come back to the school: network, network, network. I always say, when I was speaking to the class last month, I said, look around the room. I said, you know what? 80% of the people sitting around you in this room right now are going to be decision makers and influencers 15 years from now. And you know what? Get to know them now. Connect with them on LinkedIn. Befriend them on a personal or professional level, because these are going to be people. That's what's going to make you a valuable person, moving forward in the future. I used to joke when I worked at Meridian, I'd walk out of my office, and I would tell people, I'd say, like, listen, there's plenty of people sitting out there in the cubicles that have a much higher IQ than me, but I have a fantastic network and I know how to talk. And there's definitely a value to that. I mean, the talk part is definitely the funny part of that sentence, but building a valuable network is really, it adds to your value, and it really is going to pace your career, in my opinion.
I don't think anyone disagrees with networking. I do think that one area that business students sometimes struggle with at Embry-Riddle is that because we're the smallest college and we're not as well known, although I have amazing alumni like all of you out there telling our story, people wonder, well, why study business? Why not study engineering or aviation science? So in your experience, why is a business degree a good investment?
I would say, everything we've just talked about over the last hour, right? This is an industry that's dynamic. There's a lot of change. Look, there's a lot of problems that need to be solved. And, that to me, I think is probably the best component for job security, right? If everything was steady state, easy, could be replaced by artificial intelligence, then I'd be a little worried. And I'd say, yeah, you might not want to be, kind of studying in the business of aviation, but this is an industry that needs really talented people to solve, very complex problems. And the background that you'll get here at Embry-Riddle is, as I said before, second to none. The quality of the professors, the experience, the alumni that do come back, like Mike, said, coming back, to campus and speaking and everything is not to be discounted. And sometimes, you can marry both. So to Mike's point before, and that's certainly my experience as well, you can have your passion in aviation. You can look out the window and see airplanes. You can travel. You can do a lot of the things that you wanted to do in a way that might give you a better quality of life. You aren't away, from home 18, days in a row and things like that. And there's a lot to be said for that.
I think that I think business is the core of any part of aviation you're going to be in. And I think that, I've watched this industry evolve over the last, 30 years to where 30 years ago it was kind of like the old pilots club. And those were the people that were running everything, to now you have very smart business people running these aviation companies. And they're not necessarily aviation people. It'd be nice if there was more Embry-Riddle people in there, but some very smart business people. And it's not just, if you're a pilot, you're a pilot, but if you're a pilot with a business background and you have that understanding of it, you're going to go further. I mean, I talk to a lot of pilots that say, hey, what does life look like for me if I lose my medical, once I get done flying and I can't fly, after a certain age. And the people that can go from that discipline right into another one because they have an understanding of that, that's great. I mean, I can tell you, I don't care if you're a mechanic, you need to understand business because you're going to be reviewing maintenance contracts and you're going to have to understand like what that's all about. If you're selling airplanes, you're going to have a background in business because you're going to have to learn how to read leases and understand contracts. I mean, just in even pilots in the same thing. So I think everything in aviation revolves around business. Business is kind of the thing that gives you the ability to, to flow within all those worlds. You could be just a pilot, but if you're in business, you're, I'm in business, but I'm a guy that, has flown airplanes, and I'm a guy that has worked on the maintenance side. It broadens your horizons, and it's just more tools in your toolbox. And quite honestly, I think that's where the industry is going. I think you're going to see more people that, like I said, just get into business. That when you look at, Beatrice said something earlier about technology changing this industry with all the companies that are coming in now with, and Jet Aviation's got a fantastic client portal, coming in here and, all the technology that's come into this. I meet people like, oh, this guy, he was the former CEO of, Match.com. I'm like, Match.com, that has nothing to do with aviation, but here he sits in a very high level aviation position. It's because of his business background, not because of his aviation aptitude. So I think it's extremely important.
And I think, if you look at our industry and the people who did not go to Embry-Riddle, there are so many that want to go in and do an MBA with Embry-Riddle. And I think that speaks highly, right, to our business degree, because if people that are in the industry, they have then realized the value of our education. And now they want to take a step further, and they're going to go in and do a master's degree from our school. And I think, that speaks the highest, right, about our education. But you're in an environment where you have aircraft around you. Everyone speaks aviation. I came from zero aviation background. I didn't even think in aircraft. I came to Embry-Riddle by accident. I wasn't at all aviation minded. And then I just got surrounded, and it was aviation language. And, if you come from a normal business degree into aviation, you don't have this behind you. And just that your friends are pilots, your friends are engineers, astronauts, you just have this surrounding knowledge around you. that no one else has. And then you have these professors that are just amazing. And you look at and I probably didn't really realize it back then, because some of these companies were alien companies to me that I've never heard about before. But now I come across these companies all the time and I'm like, oh, great. They came from there and they've been over there. And they bring this, like, it's not just a teacher that's been a teacher that then became a PhD teacher, whatever. It's been someone who's been out there on the field, and they're bringing their experience into our classrooms, and we apply like hands-on education. And it could be, I mean, I have a lot of commercial, I think many of my classes were very commercial aviation minded, and the professors were maybe from that industry, but it doesn't really matter, because you still have I have airport operations as one of my classes, and I love it because now I understand how, the runways work, and it's just this like general, like all my classes, all my projects were focused on aviation. And back then I said, maybe I'm wasting my time. When am I ever going to use this? And now it's like the best thing I have. And I'm just like generally educated around all aspects of aviation. And I think that's so great. And you can call it, I think back in the days, it was called business aviation. And then I think they changed it to business administration. I still call my education business aviation. I don't know if it's correct or not, but for me, I did a business aviation administration degree. And to have that word in there means a lot to me. And I know it was all aviation. So I appreciate that. And all the professors.
At the end of the day, we are in the aviation business, and it is a business. I mean, we're, not too many of us, I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but there's not too many of us out there that are non-for-profit. We're all in this to make money in the business world. And I can tell you that if you have business skills, it just makes you a more valuable. I mean, even if you're just a pilot, like, hey, I'm just a pilot, I want to fly. I can tell you that pilots get the most time with their clients, more than I ever get as a salesperson. Even with my greatest relationships, pilots that fly, 400 hours a year, get 400 hours a year with the most ultra high net worth, the people that are shaping the world, and they get access to them. So when those people start talking to you, why wouldn't you want to have like a fundamental understanding of like, variable costs in operating airplanes and what your fixed costs are? It's a skill,
All right, so that opens us up to what probably will be the last official question. But I do have to ask at least one from the guest here. Dr. Wagasback wants to know, are any of you coming to Orlando next week for MRO? So anyone?
I am not, I can't make it. Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Wagasback. Okay, last question, because I want to make sure at the end we have a little bit of time for you to have the final word and speak to anything we haven't spoken to. So we've talked about networking and communication and being open-minded. The last question is kind of a specific one. When you're speaking to students or our faculty here, what skill sets do you think are essential that we start helping students develop here that will make them successful in what is obviously a very dynamic and diverse industry? What do we need to make certain is being taught and being learned?
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, I could tell you that my biggest one and probably my biggest pet peeve is, and it's probably just the way the world is going right now. And I see it with I think communication skills are the #1 asset that people should graduate with. And I think you could see that trend everywhere. I mean, I do it to I call my kids, they don't answer the phone. They text me back like, what do you need? I'm like, I need you to pick up the phone. That's why I called you. You know what I'm saying? And I think you see a lot of that with the young kids coming into the business world now. I text clients too. I email, I text. I'm very active in that space also, but I do think that what I've seen is really like a lack of like people just have this unwillingness to engage and actually communicate with the people. Like I'm talking about talking to them. I saw a meme that somebody sent me, and I printed it and I sent it to everybody in our sales department. There was a picture of a phone, and I had a Post-it on it. It said, pick me up on the handset and said, pick me up, I will make you money. And I'm like, I totally see that from people. We talk a lot about our industry of saying like, oh, business aviation's become a commodity. I'm like, we have commoditized it. I would tell my sales team, pick up the phone, call people, go visit them, offer to bring them out to lunch. If you send somebody an email that all it has on it is a price and they get 4 other emails, you've commoditized it yourself. You've made it just about price. The person has nothing else to go off other than the price. So if you're shopping on Amazon and everybody's selling it for $30 and this guy's selling it for $29.99, it's a penny, but it's human nature to gravitate towards this is the lowest price. So I would say the people should graduate with a good skill set. I'd like to see more people doing like public speaking. I'd like to see more people just engaging in phone conversations and interactive. I see people that are great, hiding behind their phone and hiding behind their emails, but that's not what's going to build your, that's not what's going to build your network and make you a more effective, business person. You need to be a more effective communicator.
So I would agree. And then I would add critical thinking and analytical, and really the ability to be an analytical thinker and process. That is something, as we move more and more into problem, solving and defining problems first and solving them second. The data behind, things, all the experience that we talked about over the last hour or so, there's just a lot of data in there that really, I just couldn't emphasize enough, needs to be analyzed and understood.
Yeah, I would totally add to the communications part of it. Email etiquette, know how to write an email, know when you should write an email versus when you should pick up the phone. And there are simple rules there. It's like if you have more than, I think, 3 bullet points in there, you should probably pick up the phone instead because it's a bit too complex for an email. We are so overwhelmed by emails today that it doesn't really work. Like a phone call is so much more efficient. And then to that, we're going to have a new generation entering our market too, that are going to be more used to social media, to apps, that doesn't want to interact with any people. They want to book everything on their app. So you have to keep that in mind too. But even when it comes to those circumstances, we're working with a very complex product where communication is always going to be key. So these communication classes that we have at Riddle, those are amazing. You have public speaking, the sales class, even if you don't see yourself in sales, to know how to negotiate and how to market yourself, the marketing classes. Even if you don't work with that directly, it's going to help you tremendously. And then you have the technical writing and just being able to communicate written is so important. And I think too, as what Damon said, the critical thinking, don't be a multiple choice answer person. I think, I don't know if Dr. Arnaud is on this seminar today, maybe. Hi, if you are. Her exams were never a multiple choice. It was always an essay answer to make sure that you really understand and being able to explain yourself. And those to study to those exams just required a whole different mindset. And I think it's, even if you have a multiple choice exam, try to have the essay behind it. And I think that's really going to help you when you enter these, because in a meeting, you're never going to have a multiple choice question. It's going to be an essay question. So I think it is good to start training that mindset from start.
I would say I agree with all that. I would say pay attention to your personal brand. I can't tell you how many times people would show up. I mean, I worked in Teterboro, so we were very like business centric. Everybody was like suit and tie, 24/7. But I've seen people show up for, on sales calls and interviews, no tie, shoe untied. I'd say like, I hate to sound like, Napoleon Dynamite, but I mean, people need to discipline their image. You know what I'm saying? Like they definitely do. There's no doubt about it, I would think that, and I think to the point of in sales, I think everybody's in sales, whether you're selling something, whether you're selling your product, whether you're selling the work that you did, whether you're selling the logic behind how you solve the problem in an operations setting. At some point, you have to explain it to somebody. So I think if you can speak and get your point of view across effectively, you'd be better off. You know, just not everybody's in like, I'm selling this. We're all selling everything, you know?
So Beatrice, if you didn't see, Dr. Arnaud is on. She answered you in the chat.
Oh,
And
good.
for all the and for all the other students who you just told the faculty to give them essay exams, you're now their least favorite alumni because you've just made their life much harder. But they do love the advice.
You're gonna like me later in life, I promise.
They will. They will. So before we conclude, I say goodbye, I want to give each of you the floor for just a couple minutes for any closing thoughts, whether it's about the industry, your sector in the industry, advice, or just your perspective on life as we go forward and what we should be doing to make this the best place possible. Floor is yours for each of you. I won't pick an order. I'll just let you go.
Yeah, well, thank you, Shannon, for inviting me today. It's been really fun with Mike, Damon, to meet with you too as well. And if anyone wants to reach out afterwards, please feel free. I'm on LinkedIn, and I think you can share my contact information afterwards. I'll be happy to speak with any of you. I think business aviation, it's a really fun industry. So if you have certain questions or want to know ideas of what you can do, just reach out to any of us and we can help you guide there. There's so many unknowns, and there's a large potential. So looking forward to that. And I think too, for going back to the advantages of Embry-Riddle, it's a very international college. And you have a lot of international friends. And I would encourage you, if you don't already, take the advantage of meeting with all these different cultures, and educate yourself. You're like in a perfect position to go for lunch, have a coffee, just discuss with anyone that you wouldn't even think about talking to, but just like pick their brain and learn about their culture. And that's going to help you a lot in your future too. And it will broaden your spectrum and make you understand that maybe this person doesn't think this way, and that's because of this. And now you really have the chance of learning that and having fun at the same time. So that would be my advice.
Great advice. Mike, Damon, either of you?
Yeah, so I would I would just, kind of reflect back on what, Beatrice and Mike and myself have said, over the course of the last hour or so. But also, as you think about where the industry is, don't allow that to, put out the fire or the passion you might have for aviation, whatever area of aviation that is, or whatever, even if you don't know what it is right now, don't allow the moment, I would say, to discourage you. This is an industry, and I can't just emphasize it enough. It is an industry that goes through ups and downs. That is just the nature of aviation. I believe that you would find cyclicality in most any industry, just simply because of the way economies work. But aviation tends to have perhaps a little bit deeper, dips, but they also have higher peaks, and keep that in mind. So that, that I would say, don't be discouraged. Look to where, as you're, moving towards the peak or the upswing, look to where that would be. And just, the again, I used a lot of adages today. I didn't intend to, but what was Wayne Gretzky always used to say, right? Skate to where the puck is going. Don't skate to where it is today. And I think that's really, if you're a student, or you're somebody who's thinking about, maybe making a change even in your career in the industry, that's what I would say to look towards. But more than anything, what I love about aviation is just great people. And, I don't know too many people that are in other industries that just really are there because they have a passion for that industry. It's one of the reasons that I went to Embry-Riddle. I was, just as a prospective student, awestruck that I walked around a campus, and at the time, an airplane took off the end of the runway, and I was walking around on the tour, and every other prospective student, and kind of looked up, and then I looked around, and like not just the prospective students, but everybody on the campus just took a pause to watch that airplane take off. That's just endemic of our industry. Like, people are here because we have a common theme, a common passion, and that's a great place to be. Through good times and through bad times. So enjoy it. I know it looks a little bit scary if you're getting ready to graduate, but don't allow that to discourage you. There are plenty of people, who are getting jobs. There are plenty of people plenty of companies who need good people to help them solve problems. And the last thing I'd say is what Beatrice said. It's an international industry. Be prepared for that. So maybe things don't look so great in whatever country you came from, or maybe here in the U.S. Be prepared to move around. I lived in Ireland for about 3.5 years. Is part of my career progression, and that's just something that's also very very much a feature in aviation. Is you have other opportunities elsewhere too, not just in your immediate backyard, and keep that in mind.
Perfect. I would like to say, first of all, thank you for Shannon for having us on today. I truly appreciate this. I believe Dr. Czar was on there earlier. I've been back to Riddle several times in the last 10 years to speak to students. First, I would say to all the students, just, remember to pay it back as you move on in your careers, and come back to Embry-Riddle and offer up advice and talk about your career path, and help other students, and be a mentor, because that really is what helps keep Embry-Riddle on the forefront of who we are as a university and the alumni all together, right? I think helping the other alumni progress in their careers benefits us all in the long run. Aviation is just a very exciting industry. Beatrice, I met you, I think, either in London or in Geneva at one of the European shows I was at. So you do get an opportunity. I think back at my career, and it's truly, I'm very fortunate and very blessed to have, and hopefully I'm at the beginning of my career. I want to say that. I hope that I've been very fortunate and very blessed to have been able to travel all over the world and meet so many interesting people. And it's an exciting business to be in, to the point where, my wife always kids and says, like, you don't even think about retiring. I'm like, I guess I do, from the perspective of, like, I plan for retirement financially, but I don't ever in my mind, think of, like, the day that I retire and don't have to work anymore. Like, I plan on working in, like, forever. I don't ever think of stopping, because I love what I do, and it's exciting. And, I say this kind of jokingly, but almost not. Like, every barbecue and person's house you go over for the rest of your life, they start talking about their jobs. And, like, I always think, I'm like, my God, I almost feel bad for this person. Like, they don't really travel anywhere. They don't go anywhere. I'm like, my lifestyle is just so much more exciting. And I'm not saying that to brag. That's the business of aviation. I mean, when you think about it, especially if you're on the business aviation side of it, all the people with private jets, they're going to fly to Europe and West Palm Beach and LA and the Bay Area. So, I mean, you as a salesperson, you're going to follow those people around. So you're going to get to go to kind of like all the cool places in the world, and going to go to the higher end events. And it's really, and meet, very interesting, exciting people, self-made people that invented products you never heard of before in your life. You'll in some cases, you'll get to meet your idols. I mean, it really is just an exciting career path to be in. Very fortunate, and extremely happy that I had the opportunity to go to Riddle, because I really do feel like it launched my career. It was the key thing that got me my very first job in aviation. And ever since then, I've had people say, like, oh, you went to Embry-Riddle? And I'm like, I did. And I'm always amazed that they're amazed that, you went there. You know what I'm saying? It's a great thing to have on your resume. And I would say, fly the flag for the university, because somebody asked a question before, do you need an FAA certification to be in aviation? I mean, listen, if you want to be a pilot, yes, you need an FAA certification. You want to be a mechanic, you do. you want to go sell a $70 million jet? No, you don't. And that's kind of a downfall of the industry right now. There's no regulation in that aspect, and you'll meet people throughout your career. And I guess maybe because I'm an Embry-Riddle snob, you could say. I could say that in this forum because we all are on here, right? Not snobs, I mean Embry-Riddle people. But I've come across clients that say like, well, this guy, Jim's my aviation guy. I'm like, have you looked at Jim's LinkedIn page? He worked at Starbucks 2 years ago. I'm not really sure how he could be your aviation expert today. So I really think that, you're going to a great university with a great history and you're leaving with a fantastic education. Make sure people know it when you get out there in the business world. It's going to open doors for you.
I guess the one thing that's self-evident here, and I love it, is I could not have chosen 3 more passionate individuals from Embry-Riddle to share diverse perspectives on what it's like right now, what has happened in the past year, and where we see the future of the business of flight. So I can't do anything but offer up my sincere thanks and gratitude to Damon, Beatrice, and Michael for being here with us. For those of you joining us, I hope you will join us for our last 2 open Business of Flight Week activities. This afternoon at 4 p.m., we will be hosting our faculty book tour. I know we have amazing faculty who teach all sorts of interesting content that they've shown you need to know. What you didn't know probably is how many books they've written and how well known they are as authors. So please join us at 4 o'clock to learn about that. And then tomorrow, I invite all of you to join us as we conclude the Business of Flight Week with a networking opportunity to come together, meet with other alumni, and virtually engage in small groups and just getting to know you as we conclude. I thank you all for coming. I hope you have a fabulous week, and I hope to see you in the future. Take care. Wheels up.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Take care. Bye.